Hello, welcome to WireMock Cloud Academy. API contract testing is a way to ensure that two software systems can communicate correctly. The contract is their agreement about how to interact, like what data to send and receive and how it should be formatted. WireMock Cloud's validation mode allows you to achieve contract testing and ensure requests and responses to both mock APIs and live APIs are valid per their contract. Today, I will demonstrate how to use WireMock Cloud for contract testing. We are going to use the GitHub API for today's demonstration. Our first step will be to create a new mock API. We'll choose the Open API type here, and we'll specify a name. Now that we're loaded into our mock API, we'll go to the Open API section. Our first step will be into the settings screen, where we'll want to turn on our validation mode to hard validation. We'll also turn off these generation options for now. Optionally, we can turn on synchronization with a Git repository so that our Open API contract file is pulled from our source code control. Our next step is to grab a copy of the Open API specification for the GitHub API. I'll do this from their GitHub repository. I'll simply select all and copy it to my keyboard, and I will replace what's inside of this document section in WireMock Cloud with what's on my clipboard. From here, I can click Save. Our next step is to come up into the stubs screen. Here we'll go ahead and create a live service forwarder stub. We'll click New Stub. We'll give it a name of Live Service. We'll choose the method to any and change the URL match type to any URL. We'll also go ahead and change the priority to 10 so that this is the last stub that will match. Lastly, we'll come down here and configure the proxy, sending all traffic to the live api.github.com FQDN. And now we can click Save. At this point, we can reconfigure our consuming application to point at our mock API FQDN instead of the real api.github.com. I'm going to demonstrate this using a browser tab. I'll copy our FQDN to our mock API, open up a new browser tab, paste that into the URL, and then I'll make a request to a valid path to the GitHub API, such as user/1. When I send that, we'll notice that we get a response back. Coming back into WireMock Cloud, we can now look at our request log to see what has happened. We can see that the request for user1 has come through WireMock Cloud and was proxied on to the live endpoint using the live service stub. A response was received in a compressed format, and we can quickly convert this to a stub inside of WireMock Cloud. We now see that we have a user1 stub in WireMock Cloud. We can come down and start to change our response if we'd like. And we'll do that for demonstration purposes here. We'll update the login name to D. Perovich, and then we'll click Save. Coming back up to our browser tab, let's go ahead and refresh and make sure that change is taken. We can now see that when I request user1, that the login is now D. Perovich. So our mock API is responding appropriately with the stub that we have configured. But if we ask for a user number that we haven't explicitly configured inside of our mock API, we can expect that that request will be proxied on to the live API service. Now let's see contract testing in action. If I come back over to our mock API, let's go ahead and change the response of user1. Let's change the ID to be a string instead of an integer and see what happens. At this point, we've configured our mock API to return a false positive. We've broken the contract by configuring a response that shouldn't be valid. Let's see what happens. Coming back into our consumer, in this case our browser tab, and asking for user1, we'll see that instead of getting a valid response back as we saw before, We are now getting error codes back from WireMock Cloud, telling us that we have an OpenAPI schema validation error. We can get further details about these violations by coming into the request log of WireMock Cloud. Here we can see that request for user-1 has a callout for a validation warning. If we scroll to the bottom, we can get further information about the errors that have occurred in the OpenAPI validation section. In this case, we can see that the request was valid, but there were several violations inside of the response. In fact, our .id, there was a string found when an integer was expected. And if we expand this section, we can see exactly where inside of our OpenAPI definition file that violation is occurring. Keep in mind that the validation mode for contract testing in WireMock Cloud validates both the incoming request and the response. Let's try to get a request validation issue. We'll come back over into our stubs, and let's change the account ID to being a letter instead of a number and see what happens. We'll click Save here. And to make things easier, let's go down and change our ID back to a valid integer. Let's go ahead and now try our request for user A. Again, we can see that instead of getting a valid response as we've asked WireMock Cloud to respond to us when a user ID of A is requested, instead we are getting an OpenAPI schema validation error telling us that a string has been found where an integer was expected. As you can see, we are prevented from creating false positives and false negatives when using stubs in WireMock Cloud using the validation mode in contract testing. As you've just seen, WireMock Cloud's OpenAPI validation feature can be used to achieve REST API contract testing. Try it yourself today with a free forever account at wiremock.io.